Hello, welcome to the Vincennes PBS studios. I'm here today with Stephen Shore, a professor of special education at Adelphi University and an international autism expert. He is a consultant and advisor on the new PBS Kids show, Carl the Collector. Thanks for joining me today, Stephen.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So for those who don't know that are watching, I kind of use Carl the Collector in my job as education outreach coordinator to kind of explain autism to young children. And I think that it provides so many good resources for children, but I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how to spread that awareness and maybe still possibly use Carl, but to spread that awareness to adults, and how to make adults more aware of people with autism just in their community.
Well, that's a very good question, because even though Carl the Collector, the primary audience is from ages 4 to 6 or 8 or so, there is a lot that people who, one, are older, two, are not on the autism spectrum that they can get from it. And so parents, for example, they can, one, get insights onto how their autistic child feels and what they experience, and how Carl works through the challenges that he has as an autistic individual. For the parents themselves, there are strategies that you see Carl's mother, Maud, doing, his father, Harold, and others. And they can learn from these strategies and apply them to their own situations.
Right. So you think that, right, I mean, the show provides so many different perspectives and it has so many different characters. And I think, you know, for anyone who hasn't seen Carl, there's Carl, he's autistic, but then there's also Lotta, and she's got some different characteristics. And then the new character is Paolo the panda, right? And he is non-speaking. Did you have any kind of say or input in Paolo's character creation?
Yeah, well, I was very excited when I learned that they were going to introduce a non-speaking character. And the first thing they asked me as advisor to Carl, do you know enough about non-speaking autism to help us out? Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, to some degree, because there was a time that I was non-speaking from age 18 months to 4 years of age. However, I think the episode could be enriched if you locate someone who is non-speaking, mm-hmm. as that person will be the true expert.
Right, right. And so I think that when people hear that that was truly voiced by someone who was non-speaking, and, you know, the dad read him the lines, and any, you know, sounds that he came out, if it's a funny situation, a happy situation, the sounds that he makes are really what they recorded and play on the show. And that, I mean, that's just a great representation. And I know PBS Kids' motto is they want to represent everybody, you know, so it's having children watch those shows and then see themselves or see characters that are like themselves, you know, that's such a groundbreaking thing, even though it seems like, yeah, why wouldn't there be, you know? Right. So yeah, I think that there's something for everybody in that. What other strategies, we received some questions from the community, just general ways to raise awareness and to take away the stigma of autism in a small rural community?
One is to meet autistic people, meet their parents, mm-hmm. Have events that can introduce families who have autistic children.
Right.
And what people will learn is that autistic people are more like you than different.
Right. I think that too. So I have a 7-year-old who's autistic, and trying to explain that, you know, people come up and say, I didn't know he was so funny. And it's like, yeah, he has the same personality, you know,
right.
Whether or not he's autistic or not, you know, I mean, people are still going to have their same character quirks and things, whether they can express them verbally or not, you know, it doesn't matter. They're still themselves, you know, and I think that sometimes people don't understand that either, you know, that character traits are going to shine through no matter the communication form or no matter the, you know, the behavior. So.
Yeah, exactly. There's such great diversity mm-hmm. that we find within the autism spectrum.
Right. And
Carl the Collector is really good at doing so.
Yeah.
A common criticism that I see of media autism in the media is that you can just fill in the blank.
Right.
Rain Man, Love on the Spectrum, whoever or whatever it is. That's not my autism, or that's not my child's autism.
Right.
And they're absolutely right, because autism is so incredibly diverse.
Yes.
And Carl, my job as advisor to Carl, was to make sure that Carl would be as authentically autistic as possible. Yeah. Carl is an autistic character. Lotta is another autistic character whose autism expresses itself very differently. And it's also great to see that they have a girl with autism, because that's an area that needs much more attention and much more research.
Yeah.
Females.
Yeah.
Autism in females.
Yes, I know. And because you had said earlier, a lot of times females get diagnosed much later in life, just because their symptoms and their, things look so much different than autism represents itself in males. So at first they thought autism was such a male dominated thing, and now it's like, wait a minute, it's kind of spread out between male and female.
Yeah, it is. And also we have to put in societal expectations.
Yeah.
So the girl who's sitting in a classroom, and generalize that to the woman who's at a meeting, who sits off to the side, keeps to themselves, doing their own thing. What do we say? She's shy, and we just kind of forget about it. The male who does the same thing, we don't necessarily say he's autistic, but at least it's noticed.
Yeah, and so you kind of talked about the different aspects of autism, and a repeat question that we got from the community for you was, what's the difference between Asperger's and autism?
That's a good question. And the line of demarcation between the two is often quite fuzzy, which is why Asperger's syndrome was removed as a diagnostic criteria in 2013. But getting back to Asperger's, some of the main areas that they look at for differentiation was typical acquisition of speech. So back when Asperger's was a diagnostic criteria, well, I lost my speech at 18 months, started getting it back at age 4. That sounds like a significant clinical delay in verbal interaction, which would mean that I'm autistic and not Asperger's. But most people, and I too, consider myself as being Asperger's. And rather than getting tied up in knots as to whether you're one or the other or halfway in between, that may be one of the reasons that the people who designed the DSM-5 definition removed Asperger's and replaced the subcategories with levels of support that are needed.
Right. So just to clarify for anyone who's watching this, children, like you said, after 2013, who are diagnosed with autism, there is not going to be any more diagnosing of Asperger's. They will just be diagnosed with autism. And it will be, how much support do they need will be varied. Right. So there's not going to be anybody, in preschool now, oh, they have Asperger's. That might be what's thought of in the community, but that's not going to be an actual medical diagnosis given anymore.
Yeah, that's correct.
Correct, yeah.
And people who were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome get to keep that label.
Right, they're grandfathered in.
They're grandfathered in, and they'll keep it for the rest of their lives.
Right.
No new diagnoses.
Right, I think, and then you hear that, and you hear of celebrities and well-known people, and they think, oh, they had Asperger's, is that different? And that's kind of what, so I wasn't surprised to see that question come in from the community, just because, the wording of it can be kind of confusing if you don't live in the world of autism. A couple of the other questions, one was I wanted to read that we received was, how would you advise early childhood educators to create supportive, sensory-aware environments for learners on the spectrum? What practical strategies can early learning educators implement right away to help children with ASD feel included and engaged?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because everything we perceive is through our senses. So one recommendation I have is get a hold of a good occupational therapist who can explain what sensory processing is and how it's different for autistic individuals. And then they can also recommend furniture and equipment for the classroom
Right.
that will be helpful for people with sensory differences. And what will happen is these modifications that are made will tend to be helpful for everybody else as well.
Right. Yes, I think I've seen that even as a parent. You know, you fix one thing that was bothering my child, and then wait a minute, that that made everybody feel a little bit better. So I think that that is such a a good observation. But then let me read you another community question. Why do children with autism have difficulty learning in a regular classroom setting?
All right. Well, some of the more common reasons. One, due to differences in sensory processing.
Right.
So the child may be noticing and may be distracted by sensory input that most people just take for granted that they can ignore. So even in this very studio, I can hear what sounds like a ventilation fan. Most people don't even hear it, or they're not conscious of it until I start talking about it. The autistic person will often notice that. And in many situations, it will be so distracting that they are unable to focus on the material at hand.
Right.
The other area that bears important consideration is teaching style. How do we bring information to students? Most education is verbal. It's auditory. Many autistic people have central auditory processing disorder and other difficulties with listening. So hearing is often not the strongest sense. Many autistic people are visually based, probably most. Not all, though. I know many autistic people are so non-visually based, they can't read a map. Other autistic people learn better by doing. They're kinesthetic. And actually that holds true for the non-autistic population. It's just for the autistic population, it's going to be to a greater degree and possibly to the exclusion of weaker areas of learning modality. So the more senses an educator can involve in learning, sight, sound, touch, kinesthetic, teaching to music, not listening to music while reading, but actually teaching to it, such as there's a lot of math rap, where students learn mathematical formulas and other operations to rap. That's learning to music.
Yeah. What are some ways, or some words that you would have for teachers if they have students and they're having a hard time, they're a nut that they just can't crack, I mean, do you just keep chipping away and trying different things and just keep, figuring it out? Or, I mean, how do you decide, what is the best way to help this child, especially early on in early elementary school?
Well, there's many different approaches. So the first thing you need to do is find out the cause of the challenge. And you might not be able to find the cause. So for example, you have a child who has a lot of difficulty in speaking. It's very hard. They maybe have one or two words, but that's it. And they're probably not very clear. So then the question comes, when do we get off of the speech therapy or reduce it and put some of that energy into another way of communicating, such as pointing at pictures or using some sort of AAC device to communicate, typing.
Right.
And I know many autistic people who do not speak, or they may only have a few words. And it's very hard. They're just not neurologically set up to speak.
Right.
But you get them on an AAC device, an augmentative assistive communication device, and we find they have the same range of intelligence as everybody else.
Right. And Paolo the panda and Carl uses his AAC device, right? So that's another example of just a practical thing that a student might see another student in their classroom using, that just got put right into the Carl show. And, that's an example of something, when you're young, you might, and you see someone playing on a tablet, why don't I get to play on a tablet? And then you realize, maybe from watching Carl, that's how they communicate. Those are their words. So that kind of helps clear that up. And that's what I think, that's just one example of how many practical things, and like you said, it's so authentic, of showing just ways of life of autistic people, because they're not vastly different, but there are some differences. And I think the people around them start to learn that, but I think that's what is so great about Carl, is because it gives it this large platform to show community members, people, they see kids at church, they see kids at the grocery store. Why, kids these days, why are they all acting like this? And it's like, wait a minute, there's something more too. They're not all just, wild animals misbehaving. Wait a minute, they do have sensory issues. Wait a minute, they do have autism. So I think that's just such a great way to get that information out there. And like you said, it seems silly maybe if you're an adult with no children to watch a cartoon, but I think that watching Carl the Collector is something that everybody should do, and just learn a little bit, whether you live in the education world or not. And I think there's something for everyone. And I guess, what was your favorite part about working on Carl?
My favorite part was the production team, because they were so genuine, and I wanted to do nothing more than make Carl the best representation of autism that they could, and make the whole Fuzzy Town crew, people in Fuzzy Town,
right,
as representative as possible of a supportive community.
Right.
Where some people may be neurodivergent, such as Forrest, the squirrel, who has ADHD with a big H, and people who are non-autistic, non-neurodivergent, such as Sheldon, who's incredibly kind and does great in explaining social interactions to Carl.
Yeah, and Sheldon is such a great example of just like what a good friend, what a big difference a good friend can make in the life of an autistic child. Having a friend that's non-autistic and can kind of help guide you from times to times, in social situations, especially at a young age, I think is so important. So I think that's such a fun back and forth that they have. The Halloween episode I just watched, and they were all afraid, and he was the one that was like, "No, guys, like it's gonna be fine," and I think that is representative of small children and also adults. Like, right, as adults, we need friends that are like, "No, it's gonna be okay."
Yes, we do.
So I think so much of that is so relatable to anyone.
Yeah.
But I guess for educators. Learning about autism, there's so much to learn, but tell me a little bit about some resources. You have some books. Where can people find all these resources?
All right, so if you want to find my books, my first book is an autobiography called Beyond the Wall, Personal Experiences with Autism and Asperger's Syndrome. And that can be found from Future Horizons. And you could also find it on Amazon. I also have Ask and Tell, Self-Advocacy and Disclosure for People on the Autism Spectrum. And this book was written because I found very few people talking about effective self-advocacy. So what I did is I got 5 of my colleagues, all autistic, to contribute their takes on how to best educate us to advocate in a way that people can understand and provide support. There's also Understanding Autism for Dummies. I'm the dummy who wrote it, or half of it anyway. It's a co-authored book with Linda Restelli. There's also College for Students with Disabilities. And that was co-edited by my colleague, Dr. Pavan John Anthony, who also teaches special education. And we collaborate on a number of projects, including our most recent book, was supporting people with disabilities and their families during times of crisis. And specifically what we did is we got research contributions from people in 13 different countries, asking questions such as, what supports did you get from your government during COVID-19? What suggestions do you have in situations like this?
Right. So is that something, you talked about crisis situations, just kind of thinking about like in 911 situations, the police are called, the fire's called, things like that, how differently autistic people could possibly act in a situation of emergency. Do you have any places of resources where like local fire departments or police officers watching this could do some research and become more educated on their own on how to deal with autistic children or adults in time of a crisis?
Yes, I have a great resource, somebody who I've collaborated with a number of times. His name is Dennis DeBott, and he is, at least was, maybe still is, a private investigator. And he has an autistic son, and that's what it takes to get involved in this area. And he gives presentations to police departments and other first responders on how to recognize when they may encounter somebody who is autistic and what the differences may be, and the way autistic people behave, the different ways we respond to communication, and differences in eye contact. They tend to set off alarm bells in people who are involved in law enforcement.
Right.
And then also in the encounter itself, there's often flashing lights, loud squawker radios,
Right.
all creating sensory overload. And the good news is that increasing numbers of police departments and other first responders, firemen, such as firemen, they're seeking information on how to better recognize and be supportive when they encounter an autistic person.
Right, and I think that's kind of the whole, you said they're seeking it out. Just overall awareness, I feel like, is on such an increase right now. And that's, due to efforts like yours and communities like ours, and, getting together and getting that information into the hands, the eyes, the ears of all community members. And that's such a vital, a vital piece of information because, like you said, people think, well, I'm not a teacher, I won't ever have to deal with this. And it's like, no, there's autistic people in every portion of your life, whether you realize it or not, and I think there's, so that's things employers need to know, and like I said, emergency responders and everything like that. So I guess, just kind of overall inclusiveness, do you have any final words of wisdom for our area just on how to keep improving and keep bringing awareness, and then I don't know, that's my question.
All right. Well, I think it's important to get to know autistic people.
Right.
As I gave my workshops here, I noticed that there were some autistic people in the audience.
Right.
And that was great to see. You'll learn much more from us autistic people than reading about it in books. The books are important, they're good resources, but that needs to be supplemented by getting to know individuals. And for parents, probably the best thing they can do is get to know other parents. The word community is very, very important.
Right.
Being a part of the community. Building a sense of going beyond inclusion to belonging to the community.
Right.
And also understanding that while there are characteristics binding us autistic people related to differences in communication, social interaction, highly focused interests, sensory differences, it's important to recognize the incredibly wide diversity that we see in the autism spectrum, which is why I often say when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
I love that quote, and I use it all the time.
Use it and wear it out.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way to explain it, and because people are like, what does the spectrum mean, and it's like, well, everything's different, so I'm always saying, like, one person means one person, so you can't compare. You cannot compare two autistic kids to each other, or two an autistic and a non-autistic child in a classroom, there's just no comparison, so it's just good to, I think, always work on individual progress, as opposed to perfectionism. You're not, instead of trying to reach for, let's be valedictorian 4.0, best behaved kid in the class, never moves, never stims, never, to just, is he getting better? Is he, improving, from over year, is the supports becoming less? So I think that's things that a lot of parents need to hear. And just know, every kid's different and everything's going to be, have its own challenges, but I think if you could leave any parents watching this with some sense of encouragement, what would you say?
I would say rather than trying to make your child less autistic, which if you try to do, the best you'll get is a poor imitation of a non-autistic person, but rather providing the support and the encouragement, community, and belonging to help that person be the best autistic person they can be.
Right, and they all have strengths, right? And the important thing is to find those strengths and learn, hone in on them and learn. And you kind of talked earlier today at one of your sessions about, if they're really, really good at something and it seems like nonsensical, but then you might realize they could make a whole career out of that, So
Yeah,
I think,
they could.
yes, I mean, you referenced somebody today who's really meticulous with laundry folding. And that's their job now, so just finding something that your child's good at and helping them become the best they can be, and definitely know that, what's your quote about autistic children having unlimited potential? I mean.
Oh yeah, autistic people have unlimited potential just like everybody else.
Yeah, exactly, just like everybody else. So that is just the best quote ever. And I think that's what we'll end with. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome.
For joining me and for joining us here at Vincennes PBS, Vincennes University. And I just really appreciate you coming to visit us.
My pleasure and my honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.